the idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Wow, look at this, just incredible.
Now destinations for our leisure.
This is like exploring a jungle.
But once they played a vital role in our history.
That's got to be the Lost Village. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm fascinated by coastal villages. I want to explore them, discover their history, unearth some surprising things about their past.
I've come to Porthgain on the coast of South Wales. The village is part of the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park and overlooks the Irish Sea. In the early 1900s, this tiny village helped to build Britain.
These are the bricks. The problem is it's so heavy, you feel the weight of
Oh my goodness!
And paved a new road network right across Wales and England. But something brought it all to a halt.
The quarry closed on a minute's notice.
A minute?
That was it. You're finishing now.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea. If you'd have visited Porthgain in the middle of the 19th century, you wouldn't have seen all this industrial infrastructure I can see here. In fact, you wouldn't have seen very much at all. It was a quiet place.
But in just a few short years, this little village would transform and find itself at the very centre of Britain's building trades. Porthgain is a Welsh name, meaning chisel port. The village grew up around the shoreline.
I can see this started off as a natural harbour. There's an outcrop of rock there, another one on the other side, creating this little inlet. And it's been extended over time. The pier wall there of rubble has been lengthened with concrete. This is construction on an industrial scale for heavy industry. And it's such a surprise to find all this in such a small place. Just taking a walk through Porthgain here, and the thing I've noticed is the age of the buildings. It's nothing terribly ancient here, nothing that's obviously medieval or even 16th, 17th century. All of the housing seems to be Victorian or early 20th century in date. But there are signs of industry, and heavy industry too. Up there on the hillside, that incredible structure now being reclaimed by nature. A massive shed down there towards the harbour. A row of what look like workers' cottages here. Now, clearly something very important, very industrial has happened here. But it's not industrial now. It's changed in character. What was this industry and what happened? I'm looking at a map here that was produced before 1850. There's a range of buildings down here, a farmstead, and I can see the very distinctive outline of the coast and the little inlet where Porthgain should be. but it's not there. Whatever was here, it was obviously a very, very small scale, hardly worth mapping. But as I move on to a map of the 1880s, things are starting to change. I can see the inlet here, and it's marked Porthgain, and that terrace of workers' cottages that I can see over there, they're in place. And a whole load of infrastructure, tramways, industry is starting to put Porthgain on the map.
To understand what happened here, I need to head out of the village.
Porthgain's past is inextricably linked to the rock in the ground around the village. And as I'm walking here, I'm walking on slate, and I can see slate in the walls there of the fields. In the 19th century, quarrying took off here in a big way.
At the start of the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was racing across Britain. Slate was in high demand to roof huge factories and homes of a rapidly growing urban population. Welsh slate, particularly from northern Wales, gained a global reputation for its exceptional quality. By the mid-1800s, a group of London businessmen formed the Barry Island Slate and Slab Company to quarry slate here in South Wales. David Gwynn is a historian who's been researching the Welsh slate industry.
David, why was Welsh slate so sought after at this time?
Good Welsh slate was much in demand because it was a light, waterproof and economical material, and it became more cost-effective than, say, clay tiles or thatch. A good slate will last for 100, 200 years, so slate is what you wanted on your roof.
So there's people busily prospecting, trying to make money out of the natural resources here. It's a bit like the Wild West in a way, isn't it?
Well, you can say it's the Wild West of Wales, perhaps, but you never know what you're going to see. They don't know what they're going to be digging a couple of months down the line,
Yeah.
and it could be that they've found something that has no commercial value at all.
Yeah, it's
So
a big
risky
gamble.
business. It's a big gamble.
But over here, they've hit a seam of something else. It's like a clayey substance. So that's no good at all.
That's no good at all. You're absolutely right. The only rock that would have made them any money is on the far side.
So the qualities of the stone dictates what you can do with it.
Yeah.
They've obviously produced something that's worthwhile because they've created a massive, great hole doing it.
What they did produce here in some quantity was mantelpieces, slate slabs, which makes me think that it wasn't easy to split them very finely.
Yes.
We got an interesting slate platform there on the edge of the pit, and I just wonder if that was the base for an aerial ropeway that would have raised the blocks from the bottom.
So this is buckets, hoppers on chains, bringing the material up.
If I'm right, and that was a ropeway system, I think it might have been to move the waste rock, the stuff that wasn't going to be turned into roofing slates or slabs. You've got to remember in a slate quarry, about 90% of everything that's actually quarried just goes on the dump straight away. It's a very wasteful industry.
Obviously, they had some mechanical aids here. They had some machines to help them, but I suspect quite back-breaking work as well.
I think it would have been a tough life by any standards. We know that there were over 50 men at work here, of whom 30 came from North Wales, with the promise of maybe higher wages, better working conditions. But that doesn't mean that working here would have been a bed of roses.
Yeah.
Very far from it.
Slate quarrying and dressing was actually a skilled task. It required skilled workers, and they weren't necessarily found in this district, so they'd have to be imported from elsewhere in Wales, encouraged down here. And that meant that some companies had to build accommodation for them, houses, and that's what we're looking at here, this lovely terrace of cottages, single story, 2 rooms either side of that door. And are those slate window ledges? Yes, I think they are. You can see the thickness of the walls there from the door opening. So very stoutly built cottages. And, you know, for a lot of people in the mid-19th century, cottages like these were a very attractive proposition. A lot of people were living in very grim conditions indeed. And if your employer could say, well, come down here, I've built a house for you, a nice tidy little cottage, you can bring the family. It was an advertisement for the place, really. Come here and you've got accommodation.
This row of quarry workers' cottages, known as the Street, was built in around 1850. One of the houses is owned by local artist Alain Davies.
How long have you been here?
45 years. 2 wives and 5 dogs ago, I think.
That's a way of measuring things.
This is my work quarters.
Yeah.
The gallery there, and then a bedroom, and then the kitchen. So they're very snug.
I noticed there's good thick stone walls, but smallish windows. You're not wanting to let in a lot of drafts back when they were built. You know, it's expensive to heat a place, isn't it?
Well, they could snuggle up to each other. There were probably about 30 people altogether living in the cottages. Big families in those days.
That's in the terrace as a whole?
Yeah.
Do you think about the people that have lived here before when you're in this
Oh, yeah,
cottage
there are
in
ghosts
its history?
everywhere. You can feel the old-timers' blood maybe pouring into the buildings.
It's a tough community.
You're right. They're a tough old breed, you know.
Alain's cottage is one of 5 still standing on the street today. But there are signs that there used to be more.
Here we've got a ruin of what looks like another cottage, similar to those ones. Stone rubble walls, bits of slate there used as levelling courses. But I've noticed something in here. Look, you can see the slates there running up to the apex, but you can also see there's a lime mortar-based material on top of the slates. The slate roofs were obviously failing. They weren't totally waterproof. This isn't the best quality, most durable slate, so they've had to cover it over with this lime mortar slurry and cement slurry. It's a real eye-opener.
At its peak, the quarry could produce 6,000 tonnes of slate per year. But concerns about the quality of the stone was damaging its reputation, and demand was trailing off. By 1859, the Barry Island Slate and Slab Company was bankrupt. Others tried and failed to revive Porthgain's slate quarry, but in 1883 it was bought by the United Welsh Slate Company, and they had a plan.
The problem was the quarry was landlocked. They hadn't quarried back from the quarry face, and the quarry was getting deeper. So they had to haul out all of the slate 140 feet over the hill and then down to the wharfs. And there's a newspaper report that describes what they did. One of the first things done by the new company was to drive a tunnel 160 yards long through the hill, thus connecting the quarry with the mills and the wharf. Ingenious. And here it is. This is the tunnel that was constructed, and I can see it goes off into the darkness there through solid rock. It would have taken a lot of effort to build this tunnel, but once you had a tunnel, you can lay tracks down, and then you can bring the slate out in little wagons on the tracks, straight from the quarry, straight onto the harbour side. This was a labour-saving tunnel, a cost-saving tunnel.
But another issue was still pushing up production costs. For every tonne of slate quarried, 8 tonnes of waste was created. The United Welsh Slate Company had a creative idea.
I'm seeing a lot of brick around the harbour, and as I look along the coping on top of this harbour wall, I can see that in 1 or 2 places there's absolutely no doubt where the brick has come from. There it is. Porthgain, proudly stamped on it.
In 1890, Porthgain started a production line turning the quarry debris into bricks. It claimed to be the only place using slate to make bricks in the whole of Britain. And this building was the machine house where it all happened.
It's got big windows up above there. That could be a massive open hall. And around the corner, the stump of a chimney. So if you've got a steam engine or a furnace, you want a big chimney to take the fumes away above the rooftops and down the valley. This is an industrial building. It's about manufacturing.
Heavy rollers crushed the slate waste from the quarry. Then it was kneaded in a mixer and presses were used to form it into bricks, which would then be loaded and fired in an enormous 30-foot kiln. The works could produce 50,000 bricks every week.
This is a wonderful illustration of Porthgain around 1900. It shows a brickworks. There's a load of bricks being taken out of it on horse and cart.
I'm heading to the village local to meet barman Morgan Miles. The pub has a few of the old Porthgain bricks on display.
Right. These are the bricks. They're stamped with the Porthgain on it. So, I mean, there's no mistaking that one.
Yeah.
You feel the weight of that.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, exactly.
Feels really dense.
It is. But you can see how it's lasted.
Cool. Well, a modern brick is light and brittle in comparison, isn't it? You can break it with a trowel. You couldn't break this with a trowel.
No. I remember many years ago, we needed to put a door through that wall there, which is, I would say, at least 2 foot wide, with this brick. And it took us, well, near on a week trying to get through that wall. It was terrible. It was like going into iron.
Really?
Honestly, yeah, without joking, it was a hell of a job, yeah. So the problem with this brick was that she's 7 pounds dry, so she's quite a heavy brick anyway. And the problem they had when they used to load them up on the ships to take out, because of the splashback on the boats, they would get wet.
Yeah.
And she takes on 2 pounds of water.
Really?
It's been weighed wet, and it's 9 pounds.
Right.
Obviously, the ship would sink, so they'd have to leave port with about a 3/4 load to allow for the spray of the sea and the wetness that she'd pick up.
Yeah. And that, if you haven't got a full ship, that's expensive.
Well, it is. Yeah, they're not making the money, are they? Yeah, don't let it fall on your toes.
No. Gosh.
Slate bricks were not the money spinner they were hoped to be. And by the early 1900s, both the slate and the brick industries were struggling. But it wasn't all over for industry in Porthgain. Photos taken around this time give me a clue as to what happened next.
This is a very, very interesting old photograph. It shows the brickworks here. There's the kiln, there's the tall chimney right there. But as I look at the harbour, I can see that it's not as developed as we see it today. As I go to the next photograph, there's a workforce there and they're proudly posing right down here in front of me, right on the bed of the harbour. And you can see these great raking struts here. boarding, forming the mould effectively to pour concrete in and create this great new pier. Now, it's really strange. This is a huge construction project. This is a massive investment. But the brickworks aren't doing so well. The slate quarry's not doing so well at all. Why now?
Once again, Porthgain looked to its natural underground resources for an income. Professor Oriel Prizeman can reveal all.
Oriel, this is a wonderful, dramatic landscape. Huge quarry on what looks like 2 levels. And this rock is very, very different from the slate, isn't it?
Yes, so this is a dolerite granite. It's incredibly hard, so it's blasted out.
So this would have been a noisy, dusty place to be working.
Absolutely.
And where was this material going?
So the rock from here was being crushed for making roadstone, to make roads all across the UK, from Cambridge, Gloucestershire, London, etc.
That is absolutely astounding. It's amazing to think a bit of the coast here is ending up all over Britain.
At the time, the road network across the whole of the UK was expanding massively with the development of pneumatic tyres for buses, bicycles and eventually cars. I think there were 70 counties across Britain that imported their roadstone from this quarry.
This does look like quarrying on a vast scale.
Well, they were shifting 400 tonnes of material per day, and the proximity of the sea meant that you could take something incredibly heavy very easily around the country.
Yeah. We're some way from the harbour.
That's right. I think it's about 650 metres in total.
Yeah.
So this is the old tramway that's leading from the quarry, built to reach Porthgain Harbour.
Porthgain's granite-like stone was thought to be some of the hardest in the UK, perfect for the new roads. It needed some serious machinery to break it down into a range of usable sizes.
I'm just picturing the scene. These are now in ruins, but imagine these buildings full of machinery. The crushers that ground this stone, this very hard granite-like stone, down into, well, dust in some cases, chippings and larger bits in others. And then there's various pulleys and chutes that would have taken the stone down into the hoppers. More than a dozen hoppers here for the different grades of stone. And then it comes out of these little doors here onto the ships waiting below. It's an incredible, incredible structure. I'm just looking up through one of the grates here into one of the giant hoppers or bins. An immense amount of stone could be held in there. And when the time was right, when the ships came in and wanted to be loaded, then a door would be opened up. It would go down a chute straight into the hold of the ship and then out into the sea and where it was being transported to. The whole thing is absolutely vast. This is producing roadstone on an enormous scale.
By 1914, the village was prospering. High demand for roadstone meant the quarry employed 129 men. Many moved to the area with their families, but had to live nearby and travel in, as the workers' cottages were packed to the brim. It wasn't to last.
The Great War started in 1914, and it wasn't too long before trade and shipping was severely affected. Porthgain relied on this harbour to ship the stone out, but there were German submarines out there sinking any ships that they came across. By 1916, almost all the quarrymen had to be laid off. Quarrying here was all but dead.
Years of neglect during the First World War had left Porthgain's industrial machinery in a bad state of repair. The Roadstone quarry reopened in the 1920s, but never returned to the levels of production in its heyday. Villager John Robinson remembers what life was like growing up here.
I've seen the village evolve over 3/4 of a century, basically.
And what sort of place was it when you were a child?
Going anywhere, playing in the quarry, playing on the crane. And I remember my grandmother saying, you know, you couldn't put clothes out on the line. You couldn't open a window. Everywhere was covered in white granite dust. And everyone who lived here had either a bad chest and was coughing all day long or couldn't hear a thing. And they were, what did you say? Because the noise of the crushing plant going day in, day out, horrendous. You know, it's pop, 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 all day long, you know.
On a fateful summer's day in 1931, everything in Porthgain fell silent.
The quarry closed on a minute's notice.
A minute's notice?
The boss man, he just blew the hooter and that was it. You're finishing now. There might have been rumours going around, but nothing official, because it was a very, very hard granite. It was a very expensive granite to crush, to mine. So they could run a quarry elsewhere at half the cost of running this quarry. So they decided to shut it down.
The quarry never reopened, but the villagers continued to rent their homes from the quarry owners. Then in 1981, a chain of events would change everything.
The gentleman, he was inquiring about a bit of land. It eventually ended up in a massive argument about where the boundaries were. So they had to go to the company to find out the exact boundaries. And of course there was an argument about the land in between. They started getting the company involved. So the owners of the quarry thought to themselves, you know, we might as well put it up for sale. And that was what actually happened.
The residents rallied together to save their village.
The villagers plus the national park and a few local people who contributed got a sum of money and we managed to buy the village.
By joining together to buy their homes, the locals preserved the village we see here today.
That's why all these people want to come here.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it is a one-off. It's absolutely perfect place to live. It's idyllic, really.
Well, the industry may have gone, but the heart of this village survives. You can see it in the structures and the buildings of its past industry. You can see it in the village homes, but above all, you can see it in the villagers. Villagers who cared enough to buy this place back when it was at risk and who care enough to keep the story of Porthgain alive.